Good morning and welcome to FSC Fieldwork Live 2020. It's wonderful to have you all with me for today's lesson, focusing on how we as teachers at the beginning of our careers can build our fieldwork toolkits. My name's Marianne and I'm in South Devon in the UK, but I've got people from all over the UK joining us and educators from Singapore and Bermuda as well. So thank you for joining us and welcome to everyone. If you have been logged on a little bit earlier today, so since 9:30 maybe, thank you very much for staying with us. And it's been lovely to see you making the most of the opportunity to have a chat amongst yourselves as teachers as well. But now we can kind of move forward onto the live lesson itself. So even with the barriers we've got to fieldwork in our current situation, here at the FSC, we're passionate about fieldwork and we hope you see its value as well. We believe an understanding of and enthusiasm for fieldwork is so fundamental to our science education in schools that we've prepared this session to allow us as a group of science teachers to continue developing our fieldwork toolkit even from our own homes. Whilst this may not be ideal, we'll do our best, and that's actually a great demonstration that lots of elements of fieldwork can be delivered in small spaces and with minimal equipment as well. So lots of you will have worked through the pre-session resources, which is great as these will form the basis of today's live lesson. If you have any questions from those resources or you think of anything throughout the live lesson today, you can ask them in the live chat. There should be a live chat sort of bar on the YouTube video as well. So we'll basically have some responses in there. So please do add to any questions or comments to that live chat on YouTube, and we'll basically be able to respond to those in there. If you can't see the live chat, you can refresh your video page and hopefully it should come up by the side of there. If you don't have a YouTube account, you can also send in comments or questions on the Encounter Edu website as well. And you can use the speech bubble on there that's a kind of chat with our team function. So it would be really, really good if you can get involved in the lesson today by using those live chat opportunities to post responses to the activities and questions that are throughout there. And then we can really share this experience as a group of science educators together. And hopefully that will make it more meaningful and we can actually learn from each other as a kind of global classroom here today. I've got two experienced FSC colleagues with me today as well, Charlie and Dave. They're behind the scenes and they'll be in the chat box responding to some of your comments and questions as well throughout the lesson. So today's live lesson is all about building up that fieldwork toolkit, following on from the pre-session work you've hopefully completed. In the lesson, we'll be looking at health and safety procedures a little bit more. We'll be engaging our creative side by having a go at a bucket challenge, and we'll be really exploring how we can use the wider context of fieldwork to give added value and memorable moments that really bring meaning to our fieldwork experiences. If you have the live lesson handouts with you, that's great because they'll be referred to as we work through the lesson today. If you haven't accessed them yet, don't worry too much, but I would recommend doing so because they've got loads of info, activities, and kind of links on them that are all essential for building our fieldwork toolkit. So before we think about sort of those activities, let's explore the role of fieldwork in the secondary science curriculum. So fieldwork is just an element of practical science. So hopefully we'll all agree that getting hands-on in a subject such as the sciences is absolutely essential. So in the Key Stage 3 curriculum, students are encouraged to work scientifically, which is inquiry-based and encourages students to ask questions and use appropriate scientific methods, including real-world observations to answer these questions. What better way is there to get students engaged in a scientific inquiry than to get them outdoors and immersed in the science around them? Moving on to GCSE, we see the introduction of practical activities. And these aim to consolidate scientific knowledge and develop investigative and practical skills. And although some of these will be lab-based, others will come to life for students if they're connected with a real-world experience in a fieldwork setting. The same applies at biology A-level. Okay, we've got 15% of exam marks linked to practical skills and compulsory practicals at an A-level age. And this ensures students have an opportunity to develop skills. And these practicals specifically reference sampling techniques in fieldwork. Scottish qualifications also reference practical investigations, with courses aiming to be practical and experiential. Even lab-based practicals can make more sense to students if they can hook them on to real experiences that they've had. So completing perhaps a chromatography practical using seaweed that they themselves have collected from different shore zones on the rocky shore, or perhaps using leaves that they've collected from light and shade areas in a woodland, will really allow them to connect that single practical to the wider ecology behind it. Of course, it's not just the exam outcomes that are going to be really important here. The wider benefits of fieldwork and outdoor learning are huge. I'm going to share with you some quotes to hopefully illustrate to you some of those benefits. So on the screen, you should see some of these quotes coming up and you can have a read of them. So the first aspect is the development of transferable skills, such as interpersonal skills and communication that students will gain from fieldwork experiences. So this first slide has a quote on from a teacher who brought out some special educational needs students on a kids-funded residential with the FSC. And she's acknowledging here the massive steps they take in their personal development. Secondly, students who may not do so well at school can really flourish in a different environment with accessing different learning styles that fieldwork can bring. So on this, there's two comments. So one is from a teacher saying about the fieldwork catering for the needs of all of their students, and it allows ecology to be relevant for all of them, increasing their all-round knowledge. And the second one's actually from a student. And again, she attended an FSC residential through a bursary funding that we provide. And she's acknowledging the actual personal development she got through it, through having a fieldwork experience where she got to learn for herself. The last slide I'm going to show you, just with some quotes on, is about the benefits of exposing students to different habitats, experiences, and cultures, helping develop the students again personally and as world citizens as well. So this teacher acknowledges the fact that travelling somewhere outside of the students' local area is broadening their horizons, and exploring and witnessing those new locations is no doubt worth it for those students in that experience. The final quote is a bit wordy, I'm afraid, so hopefully you'll have a chance to glance through this. But it's basically one of our FSC staff members trying to summarise some PhD research. And it's basically that the research is showing lots of those sort of additional benefits in terms of development and nature connection for those students. And at Slapton, where I normally work, we've been lucky enough to work with Rachel Manning and Lewis Winks as they completed their PhD research into outdoor learning at the FSC Centre there. So hopefully that sounds familiar to you. So lots of those benefits might have been recognised in the pre-session preparation. And lots of them hopefully will resonate with you personally as well. You might even have highlighted some of those as being important in your kind of Venn diagram. So you should hopefully have, if you've seen the pre-lesson resources, how to go at completing this. So what I'd like you to do now is take a moment to share in the live chat any of your own experiences of seeing the benefits of fieldwork. So that might be your own personal experiences of fieldwork opportunity that you had in the past, or perhaps you've already taken some students out on fieldwork and seen the benefits it's given them. So I'm just going to give you a minute or so now to have a few ideas and comments perhaps in the live chat for me, okay? And I'm actually trying to keep an eye on the live chat, so I'll hopefully see some appearing in a 30-second window or so. Okay, so any benefits of fieldwork, please? comments coming through on the live chat about the benefits of fieldwork that you've personally seen. So the fact that students, so Catherine said about students struggle in class, but they turn into natural leaders in the outside, which is a really lovely observation. And making science real, it's not just lab work, it's the real thing out and about in the real world. So it's really lovely to see all of you kind of acknowledging those benefits that you've already perhaps seen in your own fieldwork experiences or with the students that you've already managed to take out and about on fieldwork. Fabulous, and lovely memories in there. We'll talk a bit about memories later on in this live lesson as well. So I think we'll move on a little bit from that. So if we consider some of the other main outcomes of that pre-session work, not just the benefits, we've also seen that those benefits themselves can really be brought to light through expanding the range of approaches we take when we deliver fieldwork, ensuring that there's real purpose to any fieldwork activity through student interest and wider scientific context, and engaging with the stages of the scientific inquiry as well. So what I'm going to do is expand on some of those elements now, illustrating them with some activities that perhaps you can try a couple of throughout this lesson, and you can hopefully save these up to try with your students at a later date as well. So activity 1 is all about health and safety. So you have already researched a bit about risk-benefit approach to risk assessing fieldwork in the pre-lesson resources. It is, of course, very important that we consider how we ensure fieldwork is completed successfully and safely. Risk-benefit analysis is now a much more common approach to risk assessment. And what it does is balances the risks basically with the benefits that any participants get from completing that activity. And we can deliver activities with acceptable risk to make sure we can access the benefits of fieldwork. Your school will have its own process to risk assessment, so you must obviously ensure that you do use this, but the activities linked to this live lesson should give you a good grounding to the thinking and processes behind risk assessing in a fieldwork context. So let's first look at 3 images, and these 3 images are on page 11 of your handout. So hopefully these also appear on the screen now. So you can have a look at these 3 images, and what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to tell me in the live chat, if you can, which situation do you think is the most risky out of these 3 images? So it'd be great if you just post in the live chat which you think. So is it the rocks, the car park, or the woodland? Which of those 3 environments would you think poses the most risk? And I'll give you about 30 seconds to have a look at those images and post in the live chat for me any thoughts. Okay, we're getting a nice few results through on the live chat, so thank you for doing that. So yes, somebody's put probably all of them. Yes, they will all have risks, but the majority are coming through with the rocks and the car park as answers, definitely. Okay, so let's just have a quick review of these images and have a think through. So yes, the rocks and the car park will both have hazards in them and therefore have risk associated to them. But actually, if we look carefully at the students in those 2 images of the kind of mountaintop rocky area and the car park, the people in those spaces are actually quite controlled. They're either sitting or standing in quite a stable way, in quite a good group, or they're even most of them on the minibus in that car park picture. We can also see that there's quite a good degree of supervision visible. So whilst in theory we might expect the kind of mountaintop or the car park to be the most risky, actually the woodland scene probably poses most significant risk to the students. There are no teachers visible here, so is there any adult supervision? And the students have no PPE visible either. So with the kind of chemicals that they might be working on, perhaps to do some soil testing in that scene, they don't have anything to sort of protect themselves from that. You can also see they're working on a relatively steep slope as well. So if you came across this scene, you would likely suggest some changes. Like perhaps you would ask them to choose a flatter area of the site to work on instead of that steep slope where there's lots of leaf litter and things. Or perhaps you would give students some goggles and remind them to hand wash after using the chemicals. So hopefully you can see that we can quite quickly weigh up some of the risks and think about the benefits of the activities portrayed in these images. We do acknowledge here that you're much more likely to come across the 5-stage risk assessment in formal requirements for your educational visits coordination through school. But recognising how acceptable risk and significant benefits balance up will be very useful in sharing with students, parents and colleagues to demonstrate the value of your fieldwork. So let's have a go at a risk-benefit analysis this time. So I'd like you to make notes for me on page 11 on your handout for this next activity. So you should find page 11 if you've already got it. Otherwise, you can just write it down in some notes. So I'm going to show you a photo on the screen. And I'd like you to use this photo on the screen to analyse and note down the risks that may be present in the table that you have on page 11. So this image shows an area of woodland. Okay, so the first thing I'd like you to do is think about actually the risks that may be present. I'd like you to consider people, place and time. So some examples that you might be thinking about. Think students with reduced mobility perhaps, trees or tree limbs falling, or reduced light if you visit the woodland perhaps towards the evening time. They could all pose risks or be at increased risk. The place factors that you may be thinking about will often be noted in the local factors sections on the form. For example, in this woodland, there might be a pigeon shoot that happens at particular times of the year. You'd obviously need to be aware of that and then avoid going to that woodland site at those times. There is a glossary on page 12 to support you in the completion of this form. So if you do need to refer to that, it gives you a little bit more information about what to put in each of the sections on this form. You should also add a couple of examples to the form of the benefits that students will gain from experiencing fieldwork in this environment, because we're obviously weighing up those risks versus those benefits. So some examples that we might write in this section. First of all, data collection. They can go out and collect some scientific data in that location. Okay. The other thing that you could put in there are things like learning through experience. Okay, they get a chance to actually do things for themselves. Engagement with the natural environment. What about developing self-confidence and coaching? When I work with students in environments like this, wooded slopes, you quite often observe them helping each other up and down those slopes, talking through where they can tread as they go up the slope and you know, helping each other out. And talking of the kind of hill slopes, physical exercise, and what about reflection opportunities as well in that natural environment? So hopefully you can see the lots of benefits there, and you've hopefully had a chance to note down a couple in that form. The other sections on the form will draw further information into the assessment, like the precedent that there is already a public footpath through the woodland. If you look carefully at the image, there's a tiny sign at the bottom of the image, and that indicates perhaps that it's safe enough for others to use. It also probably has to be kept clear because it's a public right of way. And it might even be tree safety checked as well. All of this information will allow you to make a decision on that activity. So you might say, for example, proceed with the activity with precautions against slips and trips or the presence of ticks in place, as these might have been hazards you'd identified in a 5-step risk assessment. It's important as well to put ongoing monitoring in place, as in step 5, review of the risk assessment process. So for example, in this, I might write that I will review the risk assessment annually, or perhaps make sure I go there after significant wind events to check whether there's been tree falls, for example. So you have your formal risk-benefit analysis on paper, but we still need to be confident to complete dynamic risk assessments throughout any fieldwork activity. Dynamic risk assessment is responding to things you hadn't planned for as they arrive. And the key to successful dynamic risk assessment is basically observation. Have an awareness of people, place, and time throughout any fieldwork activity, and you will spot things early that may become a hazard or increase risk or reduce the benefits for those participants. And then you can respond to these. And you do this dynamic risk assessing every single day, like perhaps noticing unnecessary risky behaviour in class when students perhaps mess around in a lab environment, or they swing back on their chairs, for example, and you give them some advice and tell them how to respond to that. I'd like you to have a read of the dynamic risk assessment scenario, which is on the bottom of page 12, and have a go at sharing your responses to that situation in the live chat for me. I'm going to show you the image of just to help with that. Okay, I can see a couple of answers coming through on the live chat, which is brilliant. Thank you. So lots of you saying about how to manage the students, so avoiding those timber stacks, even though perhaps they do look quite safe and secure and well stacked, actually we probably want to take our students away from that. So maybe just using a slightly different area. And if you've got adult supervision, as some of you are suggesting, you could use somebody left with the group just while you go and do a little recce to find another suitable spot and make sure that's within your original risk assessment as well. Okay, so thank you for sharing those ideas. It's really good to sort of see those as well. So now that we've had a quick go at a dynamic risk assessment, as well as thinking about the formal risk assessment process by recording your 5-step risk assessment or perhaps a risk benefit analysis, the final thing I want to do in the health and safety aspect is just to say that sharing risk assessment is sharing the risk assessment process with your students is a really good idea. And it's what we do with groups all the time when they come and join us on fieldwork. So every day, every morning, every session, we'll make sure we involve them in that risk assessment process. They should be part of the process and the precautions and actions you put in place. It's all really good experience for the students in developing them in readiness for their own adult lives, where they'll be managing risk all the time for themselves. It might also make them a bit easier to manage in the field as well, because they've had a buy-in into that process. Okay, so they know what is expected of them. So that's a really nice way of involving them. So I think that's enough chat about health and safety now. So we're going to move on to activity 2, which is the bucket challenge. So this next activity is going to be a bit of a creative challenge. We're going to start thinking about how we can engage our students right from the start of the inquiry process, highlighting and allowing them to follow their own interests and giving scientific context to their investigations. So this will also really work on those additional benefits of outdoor learning as well, like positive attitudes towards challenge, resilience, and a sense of adventure. Remember, all of this is designed so that you can pick it up and take it away and use it in your own classroom or outdoor classroom, hopefully with only a few requirements to differentiate or adapt to your local area. So to start with, I'm going to present you with an object. So this is my object just here. Okay, what I'd like you to do, again, I'm going to ask you to use the live chat for this, is I'm going to give you 1 minute to share in the chat what questions you could ask about this item or what measurements you could take relating to it. So over to you, and I'll just leave this object in view. Brilliant. I can see lots of questions coming through, so I'm actually just going to drop the tin can out the way now. Okay. So again, there's some nice questions linking to all the different sciences as well. So things like, is it conductivity? Is it magnetic? How reflective is it? What volume of liquid could it hold? A whole host of different comments there. So as you can see, even a very simple everyday object can spark lots of ideas for questions or data measurements we could take about it. If your students think they wouldn't, if you think your students wouldn't respond very well to having such a weird item to discuss, or perhaps you're not confident enough to kind of throw a tin can towards them just yet, okay, you can make it more obviously linked to your topic. So for ecology, you might show them a leaf, for example. Okay. Ultimately, though, an activity like this is a great starting point for a more student-centered approach to fieldwork. Get them to be curious. Okay. So to progress this task, you'll now need to refer to page 13 in the handout. Okay, and if you haven't got the handout, it's basically some boxes where you can write down 3 questions. So what I'd like you to do is, looking out of your window or imagining a certain site like your school grounds perhaps, I'd like you to engage your own curiosity, having trouble speaking this morning, engage your own curiosity and develop 3 questions you could ask about that site, place or ecosystem that you can either see or you're imagining right now. So there are 3 boxes on the handout to record those if you have those, and you can write your 3 questions in there. To help, I'm going to get you to have a look down at my garden just here, and what we could do is perhaps think of some example questions. So I'm just going to move the camera slightly so you can see a bit more of it. We could look at some example questions that we could think about in my garden just here. So I might ask, how is energy transferred throughout my garden? Or, and you might not be able to see it very well, but I've got a pond, a wildlife pond just down here somewhere tucked in the vegetation. So I might think about, is there a difference between the vegetation I find close to the pond and that I find further away? So I'm going to leave you for about a minute now with your view or this view or one you're imagining. And I'd like you to write down your 3 questions that you've come up with. Okay, hopefully that was enough time to write down a couple of questions, even if you haven't maybe written down all three. And I'm just going to try and spin the camera slightly back. Okay, so if you think that your students might need some activities that could help prompt question development, then you can certainly do some activities in a lead up to an activity like that. So one thing you could do is get them to use their senses a little bit. So I don't know if you've heard of a fistful of sounds, but you can get your students to put up their hand with their 5 fingers and then actually get them to listen for a while in the environment and capture 5 different sounds that they hear in that place, or even doing a sound mapping exercise where they map the sounds and the volumes around them. And then you can discuss the elements or the connections between those sounds to draw out some of the science going on around you and hopefully prompt question development from that. Another activity you could do is something called expanding view. So get the students to look at a very small section of the environment. So perhaps look at the ground, a 1 centimetre by 1 centimetre area, and get them to describe what they see. And then get them to expand their view, perhaps using quadrats, perhaps not, it's fine, you can just expand it. And get them again to describe what further information they get as they look further and further afield. What connections are there and what science do they observe, all the way up to kind of a landscape view. Or finally, you could use something like thought pebbles. I quite like these. Thought pebbles are just a series of statements or questions that are written on pebbles, or you could use other items linked to your topic, and they encourage thought about the area or topic that you're discussing with your students. So hopefully that's given you a chance to think about some ways to prompt question development. And this is the ideal, really, that your students' investigations are kind of interest-led and they perhaps had a chance to develop their own questioning from activities you've guided them through. And even if sometimes we have to guide them towards the kind of right sort of questions to ask, often then the next step is that they might need some assistance with how to investigate the answers to these questions and what methods and equipment they have to use. So as this next stage of the activity, here is your bucket, okay, and the challenge itself. So in here, we have a whole range of really simple equipment that you can find around your house or departments at school, or some of it you might even be able to make yourself. And all of it can be used in innovative ways to actually do some methods and collect some data. So if I just go through a couple of items I've got in the bucket here, I've put in a cardboard tube like this. I also made a very quick quadrat. And so this quadrat is made out of a couple of pipe cleaners just here to define an area to look at. And I've got these sort of classic ID guides to help support any ecology investigations as well. Okay, there are quite a few other items in this bucket. So what I'm going to do is put up a picture now, an image of all the rest of those items as well, so that you can see them a little bit more clearly. Okay, so the challenge, have a look at that image, and your challenge is to pick one of your questions out of the 3, hopefully, that you wrote just a second ago, to take forward into a mini investigation by having a go at completing the table on page 13 of the handout. So this talks through pulling out an aim that you could develop from your question. It also talks through what science you could draw into that as well. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of time to use inspiration from the equipment found in that bucket to think about developing a mini investigation. And what I'll do is, whilst you're having a go at that, is I'll go through some examples of how this bucket challenge has panned out with students in the past. So you have a go at noting ideas on your table or writing out an aim and the concepts it would link to. And I'll share some experiences I've had with using bucket challenges with students. So in a bucket, we once put a mushroom from the centre kitchen, obviously quite an unusual bit of equipment, but students decided to use it and a ruler from the class to make their own measure of plant density in the herb layer on the shingle ridge by the coast where we work. So they basically saw how far the mushroom, when they dropped it from a certain height, fell down through the plants. So that was a really innovative way of using quite an unusual bit of equipment. Another group of students marked a tube to create a water clarity measure. seeing how submerged the tube was before they lost sight of the mark at the bottom. So it really is amazing what students can design when they're free to use their imagination and creativity. What I'll do is I'll give you just 2 more minutes to have a go at completing the rest of that table if you have it with you. But basically it gets you now to think about sampling strategies that might be appropriate in your mini investigation you're starting to form, and what methods and equipment using that bucket full of kit you could do in your investigation as well. So basically, how can you creatively use some of the equipment in the image to support the methods in your study? Okay, so what have you come up with, I wonder? So hopefully you've had a chance to note down some notes in that form. We've actually set up a Padlet to enable sharing from this lesson. So it would be great if you could add a photo of your completed table to that Padlet after this session. And the instructions for doing that are on page 14 in your handout, or if you've yet to download the handouts, you can go to the Encounter Edu website to find all those resources and those links. As I said, it's a really nice chance for us to share ideas as a group of science educators. So use that Padlet, please. It'd be brilliant to see what everyone comes up with. So before we move on to our third activity, let's have a bit of reflection on that bucket challenge before we move on. So I'd like you to put down some notes, and if you've got the handout, you can use page 14 for this, on any thoughts on why this is a useful approach for supporting fieldwork. And also, what additional benefits does this sort of challenge bring? So it'd be really good if you can note down these just to have a little bit of reflection. So your points that you can write down are just here. It also asks you on the handout any barriers to activities like this that you can see, or solutions to those barriers. And that would be really nice if we can share those in the live chat. So again, just learn from each other's experiences. Have you tried these sorts of activities before? How did you find them? What were the barriers? And are there any solutions or suggestions for how we can get over those barriers? So again, I'll give you a minute or so just to share some of these ideas in the live chat and have a chance for you to complete these just down here on page 14 of your handout. Okay, so Hannah's made a comment in the live chat, which is really good, that students sometimes are terrified of failing, which is, yeah, fair enough, okay. But actually one valuable element of this activity, like something like the bucket challenge, is that actually you can really welcome mistakes. If the students don't plan a representative sample, don't think about repeats, that's fine in an activity like this. It triggers discussion and learning points from those mistakes, and they learn from their own experiences how they should go about a scientific inquiry process. And that's something we really encourage with activities like this. And we hope that students actually learn from doing this. And if you kind of put these activities into the school maybe further down, so work it through from Key Stage 3 all the way up, actually hopefully they'll be more open to trying these sorts of opportunities. And I hope you enjoyed experiencing the bucket challenge, because that's the end of our second activity just there. So the final activity, activity 3, is all about context. And really, context is key in fieldwork. So activities like the bucket challenge in a fieldwork setting really help students engage with the scientific inquiry. But it's also important to acknowledge the other benefits and opportunities that fieldwork can bring. I'm going to go through a few ideas of how to continue beyond just data collection in fieldwork. So maybe note a few of these down as we go through, but we'll have a think about opportunities to add value to our fieldwork. So could students go further through the scientific inquiry process? So move on to the next stage of data presentation. So could they have a go at presenting some of their data using model graphs or human graphs out in the field? And we'll just flick up a couple of examples of these sort of ideas as we go through. Or they could perhaps use GIS to view mapped data in the field. Could they go on to do some initial data analysis, so continue through that inquiry process? Can you challenge them to calculate the average of a data set they've just collected? Doing this while still immersed in the environment that they actually collected the data in can then allow you and the students to review what the presentation or that initial analysis is actually showing. So can students go to the area in the habitat that had that average plant percentage cover, for example? Or could they go to the points that produce that anomalous dot on their human graph? When they're in that location, actually still looking back at the areas where they collected the data, you can then discuss why those areas are like they are. Taking the opportunity in fieldwork to make students aware of the shared experience they're having, or connecting them to wider scientific issues and concepts in real-world settings, and also creating memorable moments are what really makes things stick for students. And it helps them to become better scientists and better citizens. So here are some further ideas of how you might do this. And this first one, I'd actually like you to try. Okay, so I'm going to give you about a minute, and I'd like you to create what we call a string story. So traditionally, you'd use a length of string for this, but you can have a go using items you just have around you. So you might have a collection of pens and pencils maybe on the desk you're working, or you might have a laptop cable, okay, that you can use as an alternative for string to connect items together that will tell a scientific story. Okay, and I'm actually going to have a go at finishing off a string story that I'm creating just over here. So I'm just going to flick my camera around and kind of move around a little bit, and hopefully I'll be able to show you my string story in just a minute. But have a go at your own. Connect some items together that you think you can tell a scientific story about. Okay. Hopefully you can hear me? Okay, so hopefully there might have been a slight delay there, so sorry for that, but hopefully you can now see and hear this. So I'm just going to talk you through my string story. So I've actually used a blue ribbon instead of normal string, so hopefully it's a bit more visible. But I've started my string story just up here and connected the string to my willow tree just here. And the willow tree is currently producing lots of seeds and leaves, and some of those drop down into my mini herb garden down here. And in the herb garden, I've just connected my string story to the soil. So those leaves and seeds will obviously break down and become components of the soil. Then my string story goes up to one of my herbs, which is thyme. And I've connected it to thyme because it's obviously gaining its nutrients from accessing that soil. And it's currently in flower. And so those flowers will connect to some pollinators. So I unfortunately haven't timed it right with some real pollinators, but I have a fake pollinator though there just to demonstrate the principle. And those pollinators might then link to birds and become their food source up here on the bird table to illustrate that. So hopefully you can see that sort of string story connects together elements of the world around us. And what we can then do is draw in issues, concepts, and ideas. So things like energy transfer, food chains, the plight of pollinators, decomposition, the value of soil, a whole host of different concepts can be drawn in from things like that string story just there. So it's really a nice activity to get students, just trying to place the camera back. It's a nice activity to get students to recall and synthesize information in the environment they've just been exploring. I'm a bit wonky now maybe, but hopefully you can still see me okay. Okay. So can you, other things you can do, can you reference some science in the news? So think about headlines or news stories that link to fieldwork sites that you're working in. So for example, the BBC ran stories in lockdown like, can nature help improve our mood? Time in the natural world can decrease stress and improve social connections. Or climate change, will planting millions of trees really save the planet? So these sorts of headlines are actually great for connecting students to real world issues and for starting conversations about these in relevant settings. Another thing you should do in fieldwork experience is just leave time for awe and wonder. Okay, take a moment to spend time with a view. Okay, cloud gaze or sketch, or just spend a moment sitting and taking it all in. You should also try and make memorable moments with your students. Okay, give them time for some free play. They'll really remember those opportunities they had just to explore an area. You could do a treasure hunt activity if you want to make that a bit more guided exploration. You could do things that end up with really nice photographs as well. So things like geo-squishing, I don't know if you've heard of that before, but it's kind of where you sort of pinch things in the landscape or look like you're holding up the Leaning Tower of Pisa, those sorts of things, but in a natural setting. So geo-squishing photos or crazy sort of jumping photos of your students. Okay, so all of these are really great. And if you get photos, you can then take those back to school and share those through classroom displays or presentations to share the value of fieldwork and those memories. Talking of memories, reflection activities are really important as well in a fieldwork setting. These help us consolidate learning and also give students time to connect with the environment. So some simple reflection activities you could do with your students are things like a 1-minute paper. So give them a slip of paper and just a single minute, and they need to write down something that summarizes their experience, what they've learned or how they felt. And it could be for the day, the session, the last 30 minutes or whatever. Okay. Another thing you could do is get them to produce a sketch note. So this is perhaps a more visual way of doing that sort of reflection. And the final thing that you could think about doing is get them to give you some quotes, some key quotes, a quotable highlight. If they can't give you a quote, what you could do is switch it round and you could ask them to think of quoting a book or a song that's familiar to them that they could link a scientific concept back into. So when I meet people, quite often, if I explain to them that I work for the Field Studies Council at Slapton and I get to take young people out on fieldwork experiences all the time, loads of people that I tell that to just jump straight into sharing an amazing experience they had of fieldwork in the past. So they might tell me about that time that they remember they went pond dipping with their school friends on that field trip back at school, and they found their first ever tadpole. And it's just incredible. When people do that, it really shows the long-term, even lifelong value of fieldwork experiences. So really adding in those sorts of activities can help people remember those experiences for a really long time. So what I'd like you to do is now think about some of those activities. So perhaps choose one of those activities that I suggested, or you might have one of your own activities as well, that perhaps give context to our fieldwork experiences. And I'd like you to use the space on page 15 in the handout, if you have it, to produce a mind map. So if you don't have this, you can produce your own mind map on paper. Okay, I'd like you to put a chosen activity in the middle just here, and then I'd like you to put around it, creating a mind map, the additional academic learning or sort of soft skills, transferable skills that they would get from doing that activity, apart from maybe just having a bit of fun. I'll give you a couple of minutes to start this mind map. And then if you can put your mind map using a photo of it onto the Padlet after this session, it'll be great to share them with each other. An example should come up on the screen for you now. And also my colleagues will put in the live chat box the list of activities that I've just gone through, so that if you'd like to pick one of those as your chosen activity, you can extract one from the list in the live chat, and then you can do your mind map from there. But as I mentioned, you could also use an activity that perhaps you've chosen instead. Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes. I'll go quiet now. So that was our 3 activities completed. So hopefully you had a chance to at least start your sort of mind map thinking there. And again, there's been some nice ideas shared on the live chat as well. So I've had one question sent in. So I'm just going to take a little bit of time now just to answer that question very briefly before we kind of round up the end of this live lesson. So the question sent in was, any tips for behaviour management on field trips? So I'll share with you a few ideas just here. So the first one is preparation. So things like sharing the structure of the field trip or fieldwork day, and the activities that the students will be working on helps them sort of prepare themselves and know what to expect from that day or trip. Also engaging the students with the risk-benefit analysis. So as we said, if they're involved in it, there's a bit more buy-in, they're likely perhaps to be a bit more well-behaved. And also think about plan where to stand or gather your students to try and help them maintain focus and avoid distractions. But this isn't always possible. So you have to acknowledge in fieldwork that there will be distractions, like all sorts of things happening. And I would recommend you just work with those distractions a little bit. Okay, you won't win out over a cute dog or a low-flying helicopter going past. Sometimes you just have to embrace it, pause, let them enjoy the moment, and then you refocus them afterwards. Also acknowledge that your students are in a different environment and may need some time to engage with it. Okay, so either at the start, when they visit a fieldwork site, or at the end as a reward, allow the students a little bit of exploration time. Okay, and once they've got that out of their system, they might then be a bit easier to engage and sort of manage. And also the final thing is, you're all educators that have perhaps had training in classroom management, and a lot of classroom management is transferable to fieldwork. So it's not as scary as it seems sometimes, okay? So observation and awareness are key, just like they are in the classroom setting as well. So I hope that answer was useful and that the lesson as a whole was useful as well. Don't worry if you've missed a part of this lesson or would like to go back and spend a bit more time on a section, because actually you can access this video on Catch Up, either through Encounter Edu or on YouTube, and it will be available about an hour after this broadcast finishes. So what are the next steps? Well, I'd like you to return to your learning wall in the pre-lesson resources and reflect on any developments of your fieldwork toolkit from attending this lesson. You can also attend a series of free webinars, okay, and these will help develop your toolkit even further, considering how you can apply maths skills, GIS and sustainability to fieldwork experiences. You will need to register for these webinars, so head over to the FSC Fieldwork Live website, which is fieldwork.live, to find out a bit more about these webinars and when they're happening. You can also provide feedback on this live lesson there, and you can view great resources like ID guides and things that will help enhance future science fieldwork. Remember, you can also access the Padlet to view your own and your colleagues' work from today's live lesson, and you can connect with us on Twitter using the hashtag FieldworkLive. And that will be a really great way of sharing any work that perhaps your students or even you have done linked to your experiences with Fieldwork Live. I thought I'd share with you just a final thought, and this is a reason why I love my job, okay? So I love working, doing fieldwork, because even in challenging days, you will always get a moment that is this is why I do this moment, okay? And it's when a student has something that just clicks for them and they understand it for the first time, even though perhaps you've been explaining it in different ways, back in class, for example. Or that moment when a student comes up to you and says that they've just had a realization that insects are living things. They've got legs, they move, and they're actually a bit like us. And they're not this horror creature just to be squashed on sight. So those sorts of revelations, those moments are really why I do this sort of thing, and why fieldwork is an amazing tool to have in your toolkit, okay? It's a great thing to get your students out doing. So thank you so much for joining us on FSC Fieldwork Live. We hope to see you in the future, maybe at another one of our teacher CPD events, or perhaps bringing your students out on some fieldwork experiences at one of our beautiful learning locations around the UK. I wish you all the best at the start of your teaching careers. Take care and bye for now.